Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. You can also stay connected with what's happening in the theater by following us on social media. Links to our accounts are in the show notes. Last week, before the interview with my guest started, I shared with you guys that I had started using the 5-minute journal as a way of practicing reflection and intention in my day-to-day. I also recommended that you try it. I'd love to hear from you if you did. Hit up the show on Instagram at Therapist Theater, follow us there, and send a message telling me about your experience. This week, I wanted to share something from a book that I'm currently reading. It's called The Second Mountain, and it's by David Brooks. So, here's a passage. Trying to live someone else's life, or to live by an abstract norm, will invariably fail and even do great damage. You don't find your vocation through an act of taking charge. Vocation does not come from willfulness. It comes from listening. I must listen to my life and try to understand what it is truly about, quite apart from what I would like it to be about. I've been thinking and writing a lot lately on having healthy relational intimacy with yourself. I think it goes past self-awareness, and I think that without a healthy relationship with yourself, your relationships with others end up feeling empty. Mainly because you end up being more focused on the other and not being equally present in that relationship. I've also been thinking a lot about how a person goes about getting a healthy relationship with themselves. I think listening to your life is a great place to start. And I think to do that, you have to stop running from it. You have to stop trying to distract yourself. And you know how you do that. You know how you distract yourself, and you know why you distract yourself. So this week, I want to encourage you to be still. Listen to your life. Get to know yourself. Listen for what it is that you need. Then go seek that out. Well, I'm excited for this week's show. Today's guest is Diana Kirby. Diana's the Director of Business Development for the Becoming Counseling and Wellness Center here in Nashville. The Becoming is a community of practitioners dedicated to helping clients and therapists live fully as their true selves. Diana's passionate about empowering others, winning the argument that all dogs should be called puppies, reducing stigma surrounding mental health issues, and fostering creativity and authenticity in others and in herself. So let's go ahead and jump into the show. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Diana, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Josh?
I am doing fantastic. Welcome to the theater.
Nice. Thank you.
This is the second week in a row trying out doing this over video, and so far it's a winning concept. I love it. It's
absolutely.
I hope that and really, let me be honest, listeners, this is totally selfish. Like, it improves my ability to enjoy the interview, which I feel that's okay. That's all right.
Yeah.
You got to love what you do.
Well, I think that's so helpful in just conversation, right? That's why we're all shifting to Zoom and things like that, is you miss out on a lot when it's just audio, and we're all really craving that face to face. Sometimes it's too much and there's fatigue, but sometimes you got to have something rather than nothing.
Yeah. And it helps me focus too. Cause if it's just audio, there are times where, I Google one thing cause I want to ask a question, and then it makes me Google another and another.
And then you're in the rabbit hole.
And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, what'd you say? Huh?
Right.
That kind of thing. Not that that's ever actually happened.
Never, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's
absolutely.
never happened.
Well, I want to start out by asking you what, before you went to grad school, got a degree, and maybe before you saw anything before you got formally educated, what was your concept of therapy or counseling or therapists?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of that actually came from my oldest sister. She is a psychologist, and there's 7 years between us. And so she was in school to become a therapist when I was in like middle school. And so I had some frame of mind about like she was going to be this psychologist person. And I don't remember any conversations or thoughts about therapy or counseling before that time. But I definitely wrote like some haiku-ish poem in 7th grade about being a psychologist that I'm sure I have somewhere that I need to find. But, just the concepts, just very logistically and practically of like, they talk to each other and things like that. So I definitely, from the science aspect of that, like knew of therapy from her. And then when I was in school in undergrad, I actually started as an advertising major and really enjoyed photography and art and all of that. And then I read a book about the neuroscience behind why we buy things. And the little scientist nerd in me was like, what is this? Like everything's lighting up. I'm like,
what was that book?
It's called Biology, Buyology.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating. So I definitely came in through the science, and then, that kind of shifted me to Psych 101. And then after that, it was just learning more about like what counseling is. And then lastly, so during my college years, that was the first time I actually tried counseling by myself, like as a client. And I remember sitting there in the waiting room because we had a counseling office there at school, very accessible, free for students. I remember sitting there and thinking, I was afraid. I was like looking at magazines on the like side table and trying to distract myself. And I'll get more into why I went later in our conversation. But I was sitting there thinking, well, if I want to be a therapist, then I guess 1, I should make sure it works. 2, if I believe that it should work, then it should work for me too. So I may as well give it a try. So I definitely came through all of the avenues from like a science place, but didn't have a lot of, preconceived notions about what therapy was either. So I didn't have like those barriers to overcome.
So I'm curious, like with your older sister studying it, did you guys talk about it at all? Did you kind of formulate any guesses as to what it was from her?
I don't remember specifics, but there are a few things I remember. So I've kind of, part of me has always been the family therapist, right? So I was really young, and I remember talking to her about her career choices, and she was trying to decide in college between being like a biology teacher and something else and a psychologist. And I remember like talking through that with her, like problem solving and helping her. I'm sure this was like not as eloquent as it sounded like a little 7th grade me, but somehow there was something good to it because she benefited from it. And so I remember helping her, make that decision. And I think at one point she was thinking about transferring, and I was talking to her about that decision. So I don't know. I don't remember anything specific from her end of like, this is what a psychologist is. But yeah. So, and she was always a proponent and in my corner too, as I decided my own journey for it. And the last thing I'll say on that is I remember her sending me a book in college. It was Irvin Yalom's, not Man's Search for Meaning. That's Victor. Love's Executioner.
Yeah, the one that's not the one on. No, I'm thinking Nietzsche Wept. I haven't read Love's Executioner. Yeah.
So it's Irvin's like novel, basically about his clients and like his experience as a therapist with those clients, and his own, like, this was what I thought when I met with this person. I was totally like judging that person in my head. That was wrong of me. Like just the whole like psychobabble, like dialogue in his head, and like what happened with the clients and like how they got better or didn't. And she sent me this note, through Amazon, and it said something about like there are many paths in this career, and even if we're in the same field, like you will find your own path, and like I'll be so proud of you in finding that.
Aww.
I know, right? So like the little sister in me was like, okay, I'm gonna follow my older sister, but I still get to have my own path, and that was very meaningful for me.
Yeah. I think that's been one of the things that I've liked the most about this field is that there is room for the person in it. Like
Yes.
we don't walk into grad school and then get put out on a conveyor belt stuffed inside a cookie cutter.
Right.
We get a standardized training, but then our practice kind of grows and changes and shapes as we do.
Absolutely.
Which
And
I
we
like.
need that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And our clients need that too.
Yeah, and I know that I think last week on the show, the guest Amy and I were talking about, that's one of the things that's so great about finding a therapist that you gel with is because as many different types of people as there are, there's that many different types of therapists.
Oh,
And
yes.
so if you meet with one and it's not, you don't feel connected, or I guess even worse if it's a negative experience, not just a neutral one, that doesn't mean therapy is not beneficial or for you. It just means that, just like a regular person, when you meet different people, you don't connect with some of them and you do connect with some, and that's all
Yes.
therapists are. They're just regular people.
Yep. Oh, that is something I try to help educate people on all the time. In my various areas I've worked in is understanding what therapy is, and how much of that is the person you meet with, and that person is one person. And in the same way, maybe you meet a dentist and they're okay and stuff, but you don't really like care for them as a person. Maybe you choose another dentist, maybe you stay with them, but each person's going to be different. And I chose that because I go back to like, I had an eye doctor once and he reminded me of my ex-boyfriend, and he was a great eye doctor and I could not see him again.
Oh my gosh. So today's show is about projection.
I never saw him again. Didn't tell him why. And like that happens with therapists too. I
think that's okay. Yeah.
Sometimes it's a good fit, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is, and I was talking to a client about this yesterday, the day before. I think a lot of the work sometimes is just acknowledging how you feel about something.
Yes.
And like realizing that how you feel isn't wrong. Like no matter how you feel, it's not wrong. Your feelings can't be wrong.
Sorry. And we're so not used to doing that culturally, which is why it can be so, mind-blowing in therapy when it's like, yeah, it's okay. You can not like me. That's fine.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's a good transition into, so unlike a lot of other guests I've had, you're in a little bit of a unique role. So tell me, like, what is it that you do today, and how did you get from going to grad school to study therapy to the role that you're in?
Yes. So I know you usually ask people why therapy, and I'll answer why not therapy.
Ooh, I like
right?
when you phrase that. Yeah.
Why not therapy? So I definitely went through the whole process. I was an undergrad psychology major. I went straight out of undergrad into a graduate program to become a therapist. And that was the whole goal. I was going to be a therapist. I was going to be a therapist for the rest of my life and help people. And, there was several motivations behind my desire to become a therapist. Several of those things came from my own family upbringing. We're definitely a family of helpers in a variety of different ways. And so part of that was my desire to help people. Some of that to my own detriment, which we can talk about, helping others while neglecting myself. But I really did want to help. It was, what can I do? I enjoyed the science of psychology, but it was also like, how can I make an impact and make a difference for other people? And therapy for me seemed like a really great way of doing that. And as I went through graduate school, it's a year into graduate school before you're allowed to see clients. And so, I've gone 4 years now in school, 5 years in school before I'm ever allowed to actually try out if this thing is for me. And so I start seeing clients. I see clients for a year, an internship in school. There were things that I loved about it, and there were things about it that were so hard for me personally. And there's things that are hard for everybody, but I would talk with my cohort members, my colleagues, and be like, this doesn't bother you? Like, you're not like, this isn't affecting you this way? And they're like, no, I'm good. So it was definitely helpful to have those conversations to see what was different for me. And some of those things were, it was really hard for me to shut things off. So I am a natural ruminator, which means think it over, think it over, think it over. And it felt twice as hard for me as my peers to shut things off and not just be thinking and thinking and thinking about what my clients and I talked about.
Like outside of the session?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I worked, Saturdays for a big part of my internship. And it felt like, all right, I'm working all week. I get to Saturday, I'm still seeing clients. I get to like Sunday night, and I've finally been able to kind of shut things off. And now it's Monday and I have to start over again. Mm-hmm. So there's just kind of no break for me emotionally, mentally, physically, which is my own thing to regulate. And that's my own responsibility. But it also felt like twice as hard to do so. It felt really, really hard to do so. And so that was part of it. And then another part was just some of the like literal structure of being a therapist, like logistics of being a therapist. So I learned I like structure a lot more than I thought I did. And when you're working with people, people are people. And sometimes they are able to come to your session and sometimes they're not. And sometimes they have to cancel last minute. And I'm a lot better at that now in life than I was at that point. But at that point, it was very difficult for me to pivot so quickly. And, like, okay, I've planned for this session. And honestly, if I was a therapist now, I would be so much better than I was when I first started, obviously. But back then, it was really hard to just pivot into, okay, I have this one and I'm waiting for them. They're coming at 8:00. Oh, I've waited all day long for this one client and they didn't come. And just that's, a big part of the layout and the structure. Two more. So sorry.
Don't be sorry. Yeah.
So the other one being closure. I'm also a lot better about this now than I was at that point. But a lot of times we talk in therapy about how you work with someone and it's really kind of a relay race where you each pass the baton to the other person. And you maybe work with this client for 3 months, but that person's life, they'll continue to go on in their life and they will see someone else and you'll pass the baton to them. And then later in their life, they'll pass the baton to someone else. And that person's growth trajectory may happen over a multitude of years or decades. And it is a privilege to be a tiny baton part in that person's life. But it was also really difficult for me emotionally to just be like, I don't know what happened to them, and I hope they're okay. And I hope they're doing well, but I haven't heard from them. I don't know what's going on with them. And again, I would be a lot better now at that than I would have then, because I've learned a lot about boundaries and codependency that were big instigators at that time. But yeah, at the time, those were really, really difficult things for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that's so different about therapy is that the therapeutic relationship is not the same as a friendship or a familial one or romantic one. So it is a bit, when I say it's one-sided, the therapist, of course, cares about the client and the client cares about the therapist, but the focus of the sessions is the client. And so
Mm-hmm.
in a regular, two people meeting for coffee or some such, there may be 50% of the time given to each person to talk about what's been going on in your life. How are you doing? Catch me up, all that. But in a therapy session, you don't spend time talking about the therapist. And in
Right.
fact, we're actually taught that you don't do that at all.
Right.
Unless it's for the benefit of the client. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one where some people observe that a little tighter than others. But, even thinking about it, what it sounds like to me is when you were in grad school and you started practicing, you were self-aware enough to know at this point in my life, I'm having some trouble shifting my ability to exist in the therapeutic relationship. I'm having trouble
Yeah.
switching from I'm in regular relationship mode to now I'm in therapeutic relationship mode. And I think that just having that self-awareness says so much, because I mean, there's a lot of people that go through grad school that maybe shouldn't come out the other end therapists,
Right.
and they end up coming out the other end therapists, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not to say you won't end up there, but just
Right.
back at that time, it sounds like you were able to kind of see things inside of yourself that maybe just led you to think, oh, what should I do with this?
Right. And in that time, I won't go into it because that would take forever, but that was really difficult to kind of shift into thinking about, okay, what if this isn't the plan? What if being a therapist isn't the plan? What if it's not right for me? What does that mean? And ultimately, I came down to, I didn't even know what codependency was when I first started graduate school. And it was actually some therapy going as a client in discovering, what codependency meant for me and how that played a part in me being a therapist. So go ahead.
What did you discover that it was? Because I think codependency is a word that gets tossed around so much, almost in too much of a colloquial fashion,
Sure.
that it gets diluted what it really means.
Yes. So for me, I experience it as really like an identity issue. So for me, my identity for almost all of my life was wrapped up in the identity of someone else. So I only matter if you matter, Josh.
I'm not
I
okay
only,
unless you're okay.
yes.
Yeah.
I only matter if my client matters. And also I don't matter at all. And my client matters 1,000,000%.
Mm-hmm.
So part of why I think I came home so drained and unable to shut everything off is my view of being a therapist was literal 100% self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
It was literally, I wrote in my graduate school, acceptance paper or whatever, like I want to lay down my life for my clients. Right?
So that's almost like the opposite of boundaries.
Oh, it very much is.
Yeah.
Oh, it very much is. And I still had very good professional boundaries with my clients. I wasn't like going home with them or walking them to their, nothing crazy or anything like that. I still had good professional boundaries, but emotionally, my purpose was wrapped up in who my clients were. Were they getting better? And that wasn't just clients, like those were the relationships I was building at the time too, romantic relationships, familiar relationships that I wasn't able to feel my own feelings or know who I was or what I wanted. And my whole goal and purpose was in fulfilling whatever the person I was in relationship with. What did they want? How did they feel? How do we make sure they're okay? And so truly, caring for someone else to the complete and utter detriment of myself is how I experienced codependency.
Yeah. And I think something that I've found, and I want to say this because I think, if you're listening, sometimes when we hear the word codependency, it becomes like a binary thing, like unhealthy people are codependent. Healthy people don't have any codependency at all.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have found in what I've studied and read and in my clients and what I've experienced in life is every single one of us has codependency. I look at it as it's a scale kind of thing. And so sometimes it flares up and sometimes
Right. Oh,
It
yeah.
doesn't. So it's not so much that like if you are a person who struggles with codependency that you are unhealthy or bad or not
Right.
a good adult or anything like that. It just means that right now, for whatever reason, and therapy is a great place to discover this. For whatever reason, it's easier to attend to others than it is to pay attention to yourself. And
Yes.
somehow or for some reason, by attending to others, it gives you something, some fulfillment, some satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, that giving that same attention to yourself, it scares you to do that.
Right.
So
And
it flares up from time to time, and even the healthiest of people, and that's
yes,
okay. But it's also okay to be aware of what is going on there. What's starting this up.
definitely. And if I, I've gone through a lot of really great therapy and healing and growth since that time. So I definitely know if I chose to be a therapist at any point now, I would be a better therapist now than I would have been. And that was part of my decision. Was I know that I personally will be drained, and
Mm-hmm.
I know that that will not benefit my clients.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that now, like I do still self-identify as someone who struggles with codependency. I can feel it coming, like in
Mm-hmm.
my relationships of like, oh, I want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now I have more tools and awareness and self-love to also say, like, yes, that love that I give to them, I can also give to myself. And I do
Yeah.
have, romantic relationships, friendships, familiar relationships that are more reciprocal, where I'm able to put in those boundaries and have those healthy connections. And I'm not perfect. Like things slip up and I'm like, oh, that was a little codependent. Sorry about that. But I have an awareness of now for what it is. And
Yeah.
I'm also able to care for myself too, so that I'm not in that drained and empty place.
Yeah. So it sounds like you got out of grad school with some self-awareness
Yes.
that led you to think, at least for right then, that going into being a therapist was not the best thing for you. So
Mm-hmm.
what did you go into? What are you in right now?
Right. So it was a little bit of a process, like most things are. I kind of, was trying to figure things out, especially that first year out. But, on top of the personal aspects that I saw in graduate school, I also became very aware of the systemic aspect of the mental health field at large. And, that aspect really fueled me to where I am now and what I've been working on for the past several years. So, um, there's several areas we could go in here, right? But um, so the past couple of years, I have worked in overseeing federal grants on various levels. So at the university level, at the state level, and working on statewide initiatives for federal grants in areas of suicide prevention. And the last one was youth and young adults in transition. And so I still have in transition of different from one system to the other. So mental health systems, foster care, juvenile justice, trying to make sure that they get good coordination of care. And now I work with the Becoming Counseling and Wellness as their director of business development. And the exciting thing about the Becoming is it's really a collective of counselors and people who, like me, went through graduate school and saw a need for something different.
Mm-hmm.
They saw the options as a therapist. Sometimes it's going straight into agency work and you maybe work 60, 80 hours a week and get paid very, very little to survive on.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you try to go into private practice, you have maybe no business background, you have to all of a sudden create your entire business from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to is some of this ringing a bell, Josh? This maybe feels close to home. So, you're having to establish your own business, and maybe you have the isolation of being in a private practice. You don't have other people in your community, in your circle, trying to do this as well. And so you kind of get stuck between a rock and a hard place. And what we try to do at the Becoming is try to be a bridge between those things because we've lived them. Wes, the founder, was actually in my graduate school program, and he's a fully licensed therapist and has a business background. And as he was establishing his practice, he found other people coming on board and being like, hey man, I don't know any of this business stuff. Can you like do that part for me? And the more and more therapists that started coming to him, the more he was like, maybe I should be doing something about this since I have less time to see clients. So now a big part of what we do is we try to support therapists in their goals. Some of them want to fully go into private practice. Some of them want to see clients in a variety of settings and maybe have some time in private practice. But we try to do whatever we can to support them in them reaching their own goals and offloading some of that business part, offloading some of the operations. We provide things like, website exposure and social media and pushing out their information and trying to help them as they grow into their own practice, but not having to do so alone and way off in the nowhere zone.
Yeah. And that's great because a lot of that stuff can be really intimidating. Like for a person who went to grad school to sit one-on-one with people and, walk with them through tough times to, maybe think about, oh my gosh, I have to figure out how to pay taxes as a business. And
right.
I have to figure out how to track my expenditures. And also I need a professional social media presence. Oh my goodness. There are some people who love that kind of stuff, but that can be intimidating. So it sounds like a great service. So what's your role in that? Like, are you recruiting people? Like, what are you doing?
I have a very fun role. It's very new, so I'm excited to be in it, but so as director of business development, my goal is to establish new partnerships. And so I get to use those therapeutic skills of creating relationships and establishing rapport and getting to know people. And so whether that's partnerships through businesses or different ways that we try to help create referral networks for our therapists, or it's, helping find new therapists. So we have the short version is we have one specific partner now, and my goal will be to help us grow in partnership. But we have a partnership with Spiro Group, who runs Nashville Recovery Center and In Rhythm and several sober living houses. I don't know if you're familiar with any of them. But we provide at the Becoming all of the clinical services for Spiro Group. So any clinical services, IOP, PHP, outpatient that's happening for them, we are the contract therapists that provide that.
Oh, wow.
So within those groups, our therapists also are able to receive, if they're running a group, the IOP group, they're able to receive individual referrals from those specific clients as well. So they get 3 individual sessions. And then if that client likes the therapist that they've been paired with, they're able to continue on with that therapist in the therapist's private practice. So we have a feeder system through there. And then my goal is to also establish new partnerships like that, to be able to create systems and put systems in place for our therapists to have clients, for clients to have therapists, and also just kind of, one-off referrals, maybe from the website or social media and things like that.
Oh, cool. So you're almost like a matchmaker.
Yeah, I'm a connector.
Okay. I like that.
Which is fun because I've sat enough in both sides to know enough. So I've sat in the client side, I've sat in a therapist side, and that's where my passion is and where my enthusiasm is being able to help create change in this system. But I've also worked on a business side in corporate work and in federal grants and doing all the nuance and paperwork and reporting and, all of those different pieces and analytics and tracking data. And I can sit enough in the middle between both sides to help people understand what the other side is.
Yeah.
So I can explain to a business why providing mental health care services, maybe for their employees or for staff or things like that, can be beneficial. And I can also talk with therapists and I understand what they're going through and have gone through to get to where they are, and can help them know that we really truly want to be a partner in that because we've been there.
Yeah. Wow.
It's cool, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting, so like my wife Leanne is a social worker, and being a therapist and a social worker, we've talked before about like what's the major differences between
Right.
those two, because she had some counseling classes in her grad school, whereas I had nothing on what I would call macro systems. So
Mm-hmm.
like I had all the micro systems where in its interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships, she has these macro systems of how does a person exist within environments? How do they exist within like environmental systems and
Oh
governmental
yeah.
systems? And on top of that, she has the ability to navigate those and connect people to resources that can help them achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve. And so it sounds like you've literally got built into you all of those things. Like you've got the therapy, you've got the macro, you've got the business. So I mean, that's a pretty good pedigree that you got going
Yeah.
there.
It definitely had to grow inside me. I was not a systemic person at all. We
Mhm.
had someone come from the marriage and family therapy program who's most looks more from a systemic view at times in their theory in my undergrad. And he brought, I talk about this all the time, but he brought this, ceramic coffee mug or whatever. And he said, tell me what you see when you look at this mug. And all of us psychology majors very analytically were like, it's white and it has a, handle and it's round and, blah, blah, blah. And he looked at this and he said, I look at this and I see a farmer out in the field, like creating something that makes clay, that like all these like outworldly pieces coming together to culminate to be able to create this um, coffee mug. And I like looked at him and I was like, nah, no, 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 that thing is white and it has a handle. And like, I
Yeah.
was not about it. So now I am really able to see both and seeing how much change and growth is needed from a systemic perspective to be able to better support an infrastructure for our clients and for our therapists. And I, part on the business side of me feeling like I couldn't be a therapist is I just got really, infuriated. It's like things have to change and there needs to be change and better support for our therapists and for our clients. And so I don't know what that's going to look like for my whole career, but it's definitely
Yeah.
what my goal is any change I can make on my own level and playing field I want to do.
That's good. I mean, that's doing what you can with what you have and the time that you
Right.
have. That
Yes.
I think that I don't remember where I read it, but I know that sometime last year it might have been in something that Adam Grant put out, but
Yeah.
talking about how passion is not something that's discovered, it's developed. And so
Mm,
it's not like you get a treasure map and you follow the dotted line to the
nope.
X. And as soon as you get there, it's a fully formed, like, oh my gosh, this is my purpose in life. This is my passion. This is what I'm going to care about. But it's like, as you go along and you're developing and growing as a person, you uncover parts of yourself and things in the world that you care about. And I think, those of us that have the chance to match up the things that we care about with the things that we're able to do, that's a pretty good match.
Oh, certainly. And I definitely relate to the growth aspect of that, the journey aspect of that. And I think, that's part of what I'll talk about with the movie from today is that growth trajectory and how so much of what we figure out we want to do or what we thought we wanted to do when we were younger, it looks so differently when you put adultism on it,
Mhm.
or reality on it, or I have to pay my bills on it. And I'm thankful to be where I am right now that I've been able to find my way of doing both. It was excruciating at the time and
Yeah.
felt very, like my dreams have died and what do I do and who am I if I'm not this person? But I'm really glad for those moments now to be able to look back and say, yeah, I don't know where I'm going next, but like
Mhm.
I'm really proud of who I am and I'm cool with whatever comes. Right?
I
I
know.
know.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I have definitely had that existential identity crisis
Mhm.
because in my first career working in churches, my identity was so tied to what I was
Yeah.
doing. When I was no longer doing it, I did ask myself, well, if I am this job and I'm no longer doing that
Yeah.
job, then who am I? And it took me, probably 5 years to wrestle that out of me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good place to transition. Let's talk about a movie.
Yeah. Let's
So
do it.
what movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
So I brought Little Women, the 2019 Greta Gerwig edition.
Yes, because if you try to look them up, there are 4 Little Women movies out there. So this is the latest one.
Yes, the 2019 rendition.
Yeah, and also, so I rented it on iTunes when we were originally scheduled to tape. And then we had to do some reshuffling of the cards, right? So, you get an iTunes rental for like 30 days, whatever. But life happened in the middle of that. And the rental expired, I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago, early this week.
Okay.
And I remember saying to Leanne, it's cool. We'll rent it again. Big deal. Whatever. So we go to rent it on iTunes last night. Not there.
Oh, no.
You could buy it, but they yanked its rental rentability. I don't know if that's a word. They yanked it off of iTunes. And so I left the house at 7 this morning to go get it at a Redbox. To go.
Well, I got mine on Amazon. So
yeah, well, that's great.
Amazon Prime.
Yeah, that's great. So what was it about this movie that made you want to pick it? Because you were pretty you were right there. Like you knew. You were like, I want to do this.
Oh, well, I had to think about it for a hot minute.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked with my partner about it because he's definitely a movie buff. And I'd be curious to get a compilation of all your guests, like inner dialogue of what they think about when they're choosing a movie. Because I definitely had my own. That was like, well, I don't want to pick that one. That one's super girly. Or like, I don't want to pick this one because that one's childish. Or
I don't think that there's but I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think because you're a complex person who can't be simplified down to one thing about you.
That is correct.
I think because of that, you got a lot of, choices for movies inside of you that reflect the different aspects of you. And so I think that if you were trying to think of it as in like, I need a movie that perfectly represents me.
Yeah.
I mean, good luck with that. Like, that's just not going to happen.
It's my inner perfectionist.
Yeah. I always look at it as, because I've had guests that have been like, well, I had it narrowed down to these 4. And then, I really struggled and I ended up picking this one. And I'm like, great. Well, come back 3 more times and we'll do the other 3.
There you go.
It's all good.
Well, yeah. So I definitely had that inner dialogue, which is my own stuff, right? Those are the things we have, the conversations we have inside our heads. But what got me was when you asked, you sent me a question that was like, what is a movie that, the last time you saw it or whatever makes you really want to be in a relationship, or what is a movie that makes you never want to be in a relationship again? And that's what got me, because I was thinking about when I saw this movie it was over Christmas and the end of 2019. My boyfriend and I saw it at the Bell Court Theater together here in Nashville. And
I miss movie theaters so
I
much.
know. I know. He does too. It's one of the hardest things missing for him right now.
My wife took me to the Bell Court sometime last fall, and we watched maybe it wasn't in the fall, maybe it was in February, but we watched all of the animated or the short animated movies that were nominated for Oscars at the Bell Court, and it was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It's so fun. So you get the ambiance then of the Bell Court. So we're in the Bell Court. It's very sweet, fun, independent movie theater. We're watching, the 2019 version of Little Women, and we're both basically crying through the whole thing. And not really the whole thing, but a lot of it. And, so we're sitting there together, he's got his arm around me, and we're like, I feel connected to him, and we're both feeling like emotionally connected to this movie. And for me, I'll share about it, but I relate to this movie personally in so many areas. So I watched it as a kid. I am one of 4 girls in my family. Yes.
Well, I was
the youngest.
As soon as you said you relate to it on many levels, I was gonna ask, are you a Joe, Meg, Amy, or Beth?
Well, so that's complicated. I don't know which one I am, but by birth order, I'm Amy.
Okay.
But I relate to like pretty much, and I can go into it, but each storyline that the girls had, I have felt something of each of those stories in my own life.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was multitude, right? So my own personal stuff of feeling connected to it. And then I felt connected to my partner, which has felt like such a healthy growth in romantic relationship for me. So it felt very like genuine and wholesome for us to just be sitting there and like feeling our feelings and like feeling connected.
Crying
he
with
dates
strangers.
he
Yeah.
dates a therapist, he's he's in for it.
You know what? I mean, I feel like there should be a support group for that. I mean, because I know that
Probably.
I know that there are times that my wife probably needs the support of others to like,
to
get
deal
through
with
that.
us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get that.
I'm curious, like, have you seen any of the other versions of Little Women?
So just the one from the 90s, Kristen Dunst and Christian Bale.
Okay.
And I can see
Winona
Claire
Ryder was in it, wasn't
Danes.
it?
Yes.
Because I know, so before I watched this like several weeks ago, I one of my favorite things in the world is this community of video essayists on YouTube
Hmm.
who make videos about movies and comment and like extrapolate the meaning of them. And it was one of the like inspirations for this whole show.
Okay.
And one of my favorite ones is a guy named Patrick H. Willems. And he did a video on 2019 Little Women.
No.
And he talked about how Greta Gerwig, which this is funny because we did an episode on on Lady Bird. Have you seen Lady Bird?
I haven't, but I've been told I should.
So we did an episode on that 2 weeks ago, and she wrote and
Okay.
directed that.
Yep.
And then I was reading in regards to when she was ramping up to do Little Women, Saoirse Ronan starred in Lady Bird. And so Saoirse calls her up and says, "Hey, I'm going to be your Joe."
Oh, I love that.
And Greta Gerwig was like, "Well, I mean, I don't really know if I should have her be kind of the center of this since I just got off a movie with her as the center." And then she said that she hung up and she thought to herself, "Well, that was a really Joe thing to do, to like call me up." And, so she ended up like texting her something like, "Yeah, you're Joe."
Love it.
But Patrick was saying in his video about this that Gerwig really like changed the structure in which the story, like kind of rearranged how things happen,
Mm-hmm.
from the I guess the original telling, but also in the ways that people had made the movie before. And then
Yes.
kind of went on to show even through her use of colors, like in certain
Oh,
scenes,
yes.
you can
Mm-hmm.
tell where it is in the story based upon kind of the color palette
Yeah.
of the movie.
Yeah, it took me about halfway through the first time watching that to figure it out what everything was happening. But she does this beautifully aesthetic thing where all of the scenes that are from childhood, they have this warmth yellow tint to them.
Like
It's kind
orange,
of
yeah.
orange. It's ethereal, it's this very warm vibe. And all of the ones from the present or, kind of the more recent past, they're all this more gray, dark, somber reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I said because I watched this probably like around lunchtime today. And I said to Leanne, I was like, I don't know if I'm totally connecting with this. And I don't know if it's because of the like kind of back and forth kind of story. Yeah. So we're gonna actually watch it again tonight because
Yeah.
she's been working today, and so she didn't get a chance to watch it. So I said, well, I got it from the Redbox this morning, so we got it until until tomorrow. So
Well, and I feel like the second time I watched it, when I because there's a lot, it's intricate, right? But I also appreciate that about movies when they make me think and kind of go back and forth. And so it is rather intricate. And I learned a lot more about it the second time when I understood kind of where each piece was. But then I also, one piece that we'll go into is, so she does that whole back and forth. And then in the end, the end that's present is that warm yellow glow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she shows like the journeys that these women take in each of their respective, places in the family and each of their respective struggles that they have. And she shows you how they go through each of these phases, and they come to the end. And when they've, quote, worked it out or figured it out, the present is that same glow that they had during childhood. And it looks different, and it is different, and it will change from that moment on too. But for me, it was this very beautiful, she keeps going back from, okay, childhood to present, childhood to present. And if you want to put it in black and white or black and yellow, it's, this childhood warmth and fun and playfulness and fanciful, and we can dream and be who we want to be. And then there's this gray reality of, I have to care for my family. I have to marry rich or my family will be impoverished. Like just all of these expectations and challenges and barriers they're facing. And then they come to a place at the end where they sifted through each of those struggles that they've had, and they've come to their own resolution of it. And even though it's imperfect, at the end, they've reconciled themselves with their past and their inner childs, really.
So in that Patrick Willems video, which by the way, I just emailed you so you can watch it when you're done, he posits that they actually didn't.
Oh, interesting.
That because you have these two visual tones that are represented in the movie, and the one that is more kind of orangish yellow is this nostalgic yearning for what was security and comfort. The end of the movie that happens after this, let's say, collision of reality is also that same tone. So what he posits is that potentially, because he says it's, a little bit open to interpretation, that this is what Joe wrote her ending to be, that this is what she wanted, that this is kind of how she imagined things turning out, but not how they actually did.
Well, that is fascinating, because there's the whole level of the book too, which is like, she starts at the beginning and she's writing, just articles or different things. And then at the end, in the whole journey, she's trying to figure out who she is as a writer and who she can be, who she's allowed to be, finding her own voice. And then, she writes the book at the end, The Little Women, and you see it being printed at the end. And so, I would, agree that could be open for speculation of what part is written and designed and created, and what is truth or different things. But that was at least my experience at the end.
But what I liked about what he was saying, though, was that is a complete result of Gerwig's reshuffling of how she told the story, because that's not something that's in at least the other movie presentations of it. That kind of shift in tone and going back and forth between the past and the, I guess, present, quote unquote.
Right.
So I'm interested to hear more about, you said that you saw yourself in each of the sisters at different points in time.
Oh, yes. Yes, on a obviously very emotional level as well. So, I feel personally I've been each of those women at different points, and each of those pieces are, still parts of who I am. So if you kind of break down each one, like who they are in a nutshell. So Joe is this very spitfire, rage against the system, very independent, very against all of the shoulds and rules that society is telling her she should be. Meg is this very, this is just, typing them or whatever. So they're more than just this, but Meg is this sweet, she's the oldest. She wants to fit in with her friends. She wants to buy pretty dresses and be accepted. She, longs for a rich lifestyle because that's not something that she has. But then she also ends up falling in love with someone and decides to marry for love, and is the first character to get married. Beth, I don't have as much on her because she was mostly sick.
She plays piano.
She plays piano. the focus was not on Beth in this movie.
Yeah.
So,
well, Beth, I think Beth was like the catalyst for a lot of the story too, though.
Yes, that is true. That is true. I didn't write as much about how I related to Beth, so I will skip her. But
I got really sick at one point and I died.
Yeah. So that happened once. And then Amy, and I think, I didn't rewatch the 90s version one before or at any point since watching this 2019 one, but I feel like what this movie does is it really complicates Amy in a way that I have never liked Amy more than.
Phrase that for me. Does that mean that you ended up liking her, or you disliked her more?
I ended up liking her.
Okay.
Yeah. Which, what I remember of the 90s one is like just Kristen Dunst is annoying young brat or whatever, which Amy in this role is for a lot of the movie. But they show something about her in this rendition that really, I don't know, it humanizes her. It fits her right into the expectations of that time period for women. And it shows, another side to her. And so really I see for me, the movie itself, and then the ways I relate are these two character stories of Jo and Amy. Mm-hmm. So with Jo, I've related to her in a lot of ways. So she's rage against the system. That's how I felt in graduate school. Like, I hate all of this. How can I fix and change things? And don't tell me it has to be that way. I worked for the government for 3 years and felt that way there too. Of like, what do you mean we've always done it this way? I don't want to do it that way. And, coming from a place of here's what you should do and finding my own voice and figuring out what I can do or what do I want to do and finding my own voice in that way, I've related to her. But in both, really in all of them, so there's this overarching expectation in women's roles. And I think that is like the largest thing I relate to in my experience of this movie. Because, so I grew up in a very conservative, religious community. And in my experience of that community, me as a person, and especially as a woman, there was a lot of undertone and overtone of the expectation where my role was to get married, to have children, and to establish a household. And that was
really like a traditional quote unquote gender role.
Yes.
I remember like when we were in school and we were studying the different types of relationships and the gender roles contained within, and we began to study like premarital counseling. That was one of the things that they really encouraged us to highlight with clients was, what are your expectations for gender roles within this relationship, even to the point of providing like a worksheet of, here are some of the millions of responsibilities that are typically within a romantic relationship. Which do you see yourself occupying? Which do you see your partner occupying? Which ones are, I guess, maybe tied to an identity, like I gotta do these? Which ones are a little more flex, and which ones could you take or leave?
Yeah.
And I grew up in South Carolina going to a Southern Baptist church. So like I feel you on that. I mean, that's, there was a very fixed idea of what a marriage was supposed to be. So you encountered that, you see that being presented, which, what's funny is like, maybe last year or something, did a show where the guest picked Pride and Prejudice. So that's another one where,
oh yeah.
And it's my wife's favorite story and favorite movie. She was very nervous about me watching it because what if I don't like it and it's her favorite? And then at the end, she's like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "I loved it. It was great." And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it." Like, and I mean, and I don't know if I could have said that pre-grad school because I looked at stuff like, the mom in that movie was really presented as somebody who was like frantic.
Right.
But all of that was because since there was no son in the family, if anything happened to her or the dad, all of their stuff went to some cousin. None of her daughters would be would be taken care of. So for her, it was all about the security of knowing that her kids were going to be able to be okay.
Right.
Not just she wanted to throw a wedding.
Sure.
So to me, her fanaticism made sense. Like, I get that. And I think like watching this movie too, you see I was going to say position that these girls are put in, but I don't even know if it's just the cultural expectation, you know? And I think that, you know, what you're saying about Joe and Amy, I think you can tell that Joe and Amy are sisters. Like they have a common fire that they share in between them. Expresses itself in some ways that are different, in some ways that are really similar.
Right.
You know, but yeah, the kind of expectation that's placed upon them. I could see you raging against that machine.
Right. Like I fell in line with all places of that. And, you know, I end up find myself watching a lot of like period films such as Pride and Prejudice. I almost picked Mona Lisa Smile as my movie. I don't know if you've seen that one.
It's been a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, I almost picked that one. So, you know, on one ways I relate to that as a woman because I can look back and see these period films and look at real history and say, I am now a woman in 2020 who is single and I own a home. That would have been illegal at different parts of my life. I am 28 and not married. I would have been a spinster about 6 years ago. And can take those pieces of history and see what opportunities I now have as a woman that women never had, on one hand. On the other hand, I also relate on an emotional level because even though it wasn't, it's kind of in the middle, right? So it's not far off that men were the sole providers of family and women didn't work, couldn't work, etc. And so there was like an economic aspect to getting married. But in my experience growing up, it wasn't as much, you know, you need to get married because you won't be able to provide for yourself financially, but it also was kind of that too. But it was just kind of it very much was the cultural expectation. And so in my upbringing, in my church upbringing, I went to a Christian school. And to this day, you know, I really am different than my other friends and my peers from that age because I scroll them on Facebook and like a majority of them are married, have 1 to 2 kids. I am single. I have a partner, but I'm unmarried and I own a home by myself. I'm fully financially dependent upon myself.
Yeah. You're the master of your domain.
Yeah. And so I've related in so many ways to this, like that expectation of I'm supposed to get married. I have to get married. I'm not married. What does that mean about me? And so in the Joe space of like, part of me was very like, no, I'm independent. I don't need no man, and closed myself off from people. And then also in the Amy way of like, I need to do this. I have to do this. And there's the two scenes I love the most. Can I share those quotes with you?
Of course.
Okay. The 2 scenes I love the most, one is Joe, one's Amy. So Amy is when she's in Paris and she, you know, has already been told by Aunt March that she is expected to marry, that, you know, everyone else has kind of ruined the chance they had. Joe is like a lost cause. Beth is sick. Meg married poorly. So it's up to Amy to save the rest of the family is literally what Aunt March says.
No pressure. Yeah.
No pressure. You're super young. Come in here. Let me teach you a life lesson. You have to save the family and marry rich. And so she goes to Paris. You know, she's doing her painting and her studies. And Lori is
wait. Which at this point, like, I know that it's tough to tell when you're like watching a movie. I think the character is somewhere around 14, even though Florence Pugh is not 14.
Oh, I have no idea what actress they are.
I think the character in the story is like not just young, but like really young at this point.
Well,
yeah.
That would track in like, you know, 1800s when Louisa May Alcott wrote the book and when women got married so young and things like that.
My grandmother.
You mean she's 14 in that scene or 14 when she's in Paris?
I thought the scene you're talking about was when she was in Paris.
Yes, but when Aunt March talks to her in her den or whatever and tells her she has to get married is before she goes to Paris, I think.
Yeah, 14 in there.
Okay. Oh, gracious.
Which my grandmother on my mom's side was 14 when she first got married.
Yeah, mine was 16.
Yeah, and then had her first kid at 16, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it's not
different
far
times.
off.
Yeah, different times.
Yeah. So she's in Paris, and Lori is, picking at her and like, why do you have to care about this? Or, whatever. He doesn't want her to marry the guy that she's intended to marry. Which there's a lot behind that, but she's kind of poking at her of like, why are you marrying him because he's rich? Like that's shallow or whatever. And, I love this scene from her. I could like watch it over and over again, but he says something about like, maybe you can be a poet. And she says, well, I'm not a poet. I'm just a woman. And as a woman, I have no way to make money, not enough to earn a living and support my family. Even if I had my own money, which I don't, it would belong to my husband the minute we were married. If we had children, they would belong to him, not me. They would be his property. So don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is. It may not be for you, but it most certainly is for me. Whew.
That's some realness. Yeah.
Woo, girl. And there's still aspects of that in our culture now. There's aspects of that in life now. And like, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but I relate to that because in my own culture, I'm an anomaly. I've created my own life. I fully sustain myself. And it's 2020. There's like 99% of other people out there that be like, yeah, girl, of course you do. But in my culture, it's abnormal. Mm-hmm. And when I talk with my friends, they're like, yeah, my husband does that. I'm like, okay, well, I do both. Mm-hmm. So there's an interesting space on that. And then the other part that I love about Jo that I also relate to is towards the end, she is talking to Marmee, and she's, kind of come back from the place, the boarding school or wherever she's working. And
this is just me kind of like, trying to still put my hands around part of the movie. Is Marmee their mom?
Yeah. It's a dumb name. I don't like it.
Okay.
They call her that in the 90s one too. I don't know why I don't like it. Because yes, Marmee is.
I thought she was, and then at some point in the movie when they said Marmee, I was like, wait, is she more like a nanny or a caretaker or something like that?
Yeah. No, she's mom.
All right.
They just gave her a weird name. I don't know why. So the second part I love about Jo, and actually I did a little research before and learned that this quote isn't actually from Little Women. It's from another one of Louisa May Alcott's books called Rose in Bloom. It's another one of her novels, but Greta Gerwig plucked it out and put it here for Jo. So it's towards the end of the movie. Jo is talking to Marmee, the mom. And she's come back and she's saying, I think that I was too harsh on Lori. I turned him down prematurely when he asked me to marry him.
Jo is saying this, yeah.
Yes. I think that if he asked me again, I would say yes. And Marmee's like, do you love him? And she's like, I think if he asked me, I would say yes. And she's like, do you love him? And she's like, basically no, but she's like, I want to be loved. Like, I want love. And she says, like tears in her eye. And this is the part that makes me cry every time. And she says, women have minds and souls as well as hearts. They have ambition and talent as well as beauty. And I'm so sick of being told that love is all a woman is fit for. But I am so lonely.
Ugh, yeah.
Right? I don't want to cry now. I'm like, I feel that so deeply because I've been there and I've been, rage against the machine of quit telling me I have to get married. One, obviously I'm not. So you telling me isn't helping. Two, I can do so many other things also. Mm-hmm. And that is the beauty of, women and men. There are so many options now. You can stay at home if you're a dad. You can stay at home if you're a mom. You can both work. You can decide what's best for you. But in the experience that I grew up in, it was get married, have children.
Mm-hmm. You felt like you had one path that was
Oh
available.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that didn't work out for me. So I had to figure something else out. And I raised
Did it not work out for you, or was it, I mean, I obviously I don't know your whole story, but like
Sure.
I would imagine, because I think that, so my wife and I got married and I was 34. So like I was later on, I had friends that got married at 20, at 19.
Oh yeah.
Like
Most of mine were.
by the time I got married, one of my groomsmen had 4 kids.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean like he had 4 babies. One of his kids was, I think, like 12. Like, I mean, they had like kids that were people.
Yeah.
You know? And so there was a lot of times during that process, or during that time, where I said something very similar, like, clearly this is not going to work out. But I didn't know where the story was going to go.
Right.
I think in me saying that at the time, that was a way of being able to not feel my longing for that kind of relationship and my sadness for not having it.
Right.
So for me, well, clearly it's not going to work out, was like, that was me taking a little bit more control, which, I mean, control is the natural human response to fear. And so it was like also like a fear that it may not work out. And am I going to be okay?
Yeah. I know, and I relate. Like, you're right that that's a good nuance to put to it. Of, when I say that it didn't work out, for me, it didn't work out in the time frame I was told that it was supposed to. Right. So their path,
yes.
yeah. Their path of getting married in my early 20s didn't work out.
Right.
Like that path is gone. But instead of that, I had to forge my own path, and it was really hard, but incredibly meaningful. And on the path that I forged myself, I was that quote from Joe in its entirety. So I was both rage against the machine. I'm independent. I don't need anyone. And in doing so, I really shut myself off to relationship. I really did. I had great friendships, family, but if it was a romantic relationship, it was not going to happen because I couldn't let myself feel.
You had to
And
protect
be
yourself.
Close. Yeah. I couldn't let myself be intimate. And so I relate to that. And I'm so lonely. Like, this is how I'm trying to control this situation, is not need it or not want it or not try to have to need any relationship. And I've now come to a place like, and I honestly, like, just to be on the honest, real front, like, I went to therapy. I've gone to therapy for several reasons, but that was one of the reasons I went to therapy. Is I finally sat down with myself and said, I'm in my own way, and I will be alone in my life, and it will be of my own making.
So here's the deal. When I went to therapy, I arrived there with a similar thought. To me, it was, I've been in several relationships that have crashed and burned magnificently.
Yeah.
And I am the common thread in all of them.
Yeah. Isn't that the worst?
I remember saying that to some folks before I went to therapy, and they'd be like, no. And I'd be like,
great.
Yes. No, I really was. I was the only common person in all of these pairings. Like, I'm not saying that in a way that was like self-shaming or self-hating, but I was like, I've got a part and I want to address that.
Yeah. And it really, like, that sent me to the room. And it wasn't I will not be whole or complete without a relationship. It was okay, how do I get out of my own way? Because I do want genuine connection to other people. And even though I do have connection with my friends and family, I'm sure there's still a part of this stuff that I'm working through that affects even those. So how can I address this, a lot of upbringing stuff and things that happen in childhood. And I went through a series of EMDR sessions and trauma sessions to really work through what was underlying my own barriers to relationship. And I'm glad to share about that, but I want to say that on the other side of that, what I have found is so beautiful and meaningful. That when I did start having a boyfriend and having a partner, and family would be like, isn't he wonderful? Isn't he your whole life? Blah, blah, blah. And I was so proud to say, he is a really nice addition to my already full life.
Yeah. Ooh, that'll preach. I like
right?
that.
Right?
Yeah.
I know. I said that to my aunt.
Yeah. Well, so here's something that I'm jiving with in what you're saying with Amy and Joe and yourself.
Yeah.
And this is something I've used with clients before. This is the benefit of video. So
Cool.
with Amy,
yes,
not with 100%. Amy, with Joe, total independence. I don't need anybody. And I think really with Joe, it was a little bit more than that. It was, I can't let myself need anybody.
Correct.
And then with Amy, it was total dependence. Like I have to be dependent upon other people, which really with Amy, I like how nuanced these characters were. I think it was like a begrudging dependence. It was like,
oh, sure.
Because I think she had some Joe in her where she knew she could do it, but she felt beaten down to where I know I can do it, but I don't know if I have it in me to do it. So I just have to resign myself to like kind of go along with it. And I feel like from what you're saying, where you've arrived at is that interdependence, which is this like, I don't necessarily need you, but my life is better with you in it.
Oh yeah.
And I want to depend on you, and I want you to depend on me, and I want us to shoulder this together and support each other. And so it's this like beautiful, I mean, no pun intended, marriage of responsibility and relationship versus being totally about responsibility, which I think is what independence versus dependence is. Independence, I've got to be totally responsible for myself. I can't let anybody else in. Dependence, I want them to be totally responsible for me.
Yeah.
And then interdependence, hey, let's link arms and do this game of Red Rover for the rest of our lives. Or not even the rest of our lives, but for however long we want to.
Yeah. No, I love that way of putting it. Interdependence is something my partner and I talk a lot about, and something we, you and I talked about. Wild Heart Meditation Center is something that they talk about there a lot, and that's definitely a growth point for me in all of my relationships. That I, from my own upbringing, like I am no more worth a person now because I have a boyfriend or a partner or a husband at some point maybe. I have fully developed who I am and will keep doing so. But I've also learned the beauty of interdependence, opening yourself up to relationship and intimacy and connection. And it's made me a better person. It's made me a better friend and, a partner, of course, but it's also helped me heal. Like, yeah.
Well, you know what's crazy about that is the hurts and the trauma that exist in our lives that were put there in the context of a relationship.
Sure.
And I don't mean this purely as a romantic thing, but like the healing comes through relationship as well. Now, I don't want people to hear me say, hey, if you've got hurts in your past,
right,
a new person's going to fix it.
Correct.
Because sometimes it comes in the context of a therapeutic relationship. Sometimes it comes in the context of a friend or a mentor or a caring family member or a teacher or pastor or whatever it is.
Right.
And sometimes it can come in the context of a romantic relationship too. But I think what I'm hearing from your story, and I would say this is 100% true for mine too, is one of the things that I learned and grew in that allowed me to finally get into a healthy romantic relationship to the point that we're married now is I learned that, I was taught this concept when I was younger in my faith community of, the two become one. But what I kind of took that as, in Jerry Maguire terms, you complete me, was
Uh-huh.
that I don't have to be a whole person. I just have to find my other half, which
Right.
together make a one. But what I've learned from my education and from my own experiences, no, you got to practice a different kind of math. I have to be a whole one.
Mm-hmm.
She has to be a whole one. And
Yeah.
then when we come together, we make a whole one. Because if I come as just a half and she comes as a half, when we join together, we're still a half.
Yeah.
And so for me, going to 3 years of therapy, doing all the personal work I did, like, I don't think I would have been ready to be in a relationship with Leanne a day before I got into it.
Oh yeah, I relate to that.
And I think because, and I look back and I can say I am so thankful that it took me longer to get there, because it gave me the time to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the beauties of, interdependence is, while my identity is not dependent upon Leanne for anything, she has made my life so much infinitely better. Like, if you'd have given me a blank piece of butcher paper and a bunch of colored scented markers, because those are the best kind,
Absolutely.
and you would have said, like, listen, write out, design, draw your perfect idea of a spouse, what I would have put down would not have come anywhere near her.
Yeah, agreed.
I was so limited in my imagination and in my understanding of myself and what I needed. And then just by becoming more self-aware, just by being able to do my own personal work, whenever, back in 2013, when I am sitting in the manager's office of a Starbucks in Irmo, South Carolina, getting onboarded to start my new job, and this woman walks in behind me to put her coat up and introduces herself to me as Leanne, whenever she walked into my life, I was like, okay,
Hello.
here we go.
Right.
Here we go. But it's that
And
interdependence piece, and it's just been
yes.
it's been great. And I feel that, like, I had to build something myself in order to be able to contribute to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. And I know so many people come to their own healing and their own journeys in different ways. And so, some people may already be in relationship and there's been a lot of, difficulties building up over years and decades. And the beauty of being a therapist is that you believe that there's hope and time for everything, right? That there's no one, too long down a road that things can't change or turn or pivot. And I'm thankful for the times that I've had to myself to figure out who I am. But I also know, like, there's a million people I know that are in relationships that they haven't yet figured out,
Mhm.
who they are, deciding those things for themselves. And um, I don't know. I think that's the beautiful thing about interdependence is it's not nuanced just to a certain timing or to a certain type of relationship. And I've learned interdependence in each of my relationships.
Hmm.
And for me, what was so powerful about this specific romantic relationship was personally for me, because I had so much stuff attached to romantic relationships from my upbringing, from my culture of what a romantic relationship should be and is supposed to be and what time it was. And for me to really be able to cultivate that on my own, to come to a place that says, he's great and I do love him, but I can also take or leave him. We talk about that all the time. We talk about, like, not breaking up, but we talk about, like, yeah, if this ended, it would hurt and we would be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That's a sense of
interdependence.
security in
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful for that, like,
Mhm.
he isn't the only person in my life. He won't be the only person in my life. If there's a time he's not in my life, I am still okay. And I still
Yeah.
have learned the ability to open myself up to relationship and connection and genuine intimacy in general, that I now have that among all of my relationships. And I know I have
Mm.
that within myself that I can cultivate.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, to look back at the beginning of our conversation where you talked about having this sense of codependency.
Yeah.
To hear your story come to the place that it's at now.
Yeah.
Practicing healthy interdependence and knowing that not only if he's not okay, you'll be okay, but also even if he's not in the picture, you'll be okay. Which you want him in the picture.
Sure. Yeah.
He's a great.
I do. He's
He's
great.
a great picture. He's a great picture. but to me, that it's the marker of personal growth and transformation.
Yeah.
And the language that you've used to tell your story, to go from A to B is incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah. Thank you. And Adam, you're gonna make me cry.
It's what I do. I'm a therapist.
That's what you're here for, right? I know. Yeah, and that's that really encompasses what I saw for Joe and for Amy. That I saw that character growth, just like you were sharing. That really was very touching when you just shared it that way, because that is how I've experienced it, of coming from a place of and experiencing full codependency, and in my own body really feeling like I will not be close to someone. I don't know how, I don't know what to do. And I try to be close to people and it keeps hurting and only hurting. And then to come through this journey of being full and whole in and of myself and having skills and tools to love someone deeply and fully and it not destroy me in the process has been paramount.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's so, coming from a place of specializing in addiction, there's some commonalities between addiction and codependency.
Oh yeah.
In fact, let's talk about a dyadic, like a pair romantic relationship. If one of them is the addict, their partner is typically called a co-addict. And co-addictive behavior sometimes shakes out into a lot of managing the behaviors of the addict, which looks a lot like codependency. And a lot of that is because it is this inability to regulate the self for the anxiety and tension that arises inside whenever levels of feeling become perceivingly unmanageable. And so rather than being able to attend to those and self-regulate, I'm going to attend to you. And I'm going to basically, if I can get you to stop the behavior, then I'll be okay.
Right.
And so I think that what it sounds like in your journey was you became whole and you learned how to self-regulate. You learned how to take care of you.
Yeah.
And that's so crazy because I know that a lot of crazy, what a terrible thing to say in the context of therapy. It's so, I use it in that context in the sense of amazing. It's so amazing because I think that when most people come awake to codependency within themselves, they think that it is like a deficit of personality. And if they can just learn to behave differently, or they think that it's like a disorder that they can take a pill for, or they think that, it's something that they have to learn to tamp down and hide. Right. Like they've got to hold their breath and that'll, but if you look at it as the same type of attempt at managing, engaging with, and understanding the world as a lot of other things that people struggle with, as addiction or as any other type of maladaptive coping strategy, then that means that if you learned it, that means you can unlearn it.
Yeah.
Or you can learn something different. And so I was telling a client the other day, describe for me what it feels, typical therapist, describe for me what it feels like when you are experiencing a flare up of codependence. And he said, it feels like there's a bunch of bees in my chest.
Huh.
And I was like, that sounds terrifying, but okay. And I said, so what can happen is that we can learn that that becomes a signal.
Mm-hmm.
Like that becomes a flag that comes up to where even if you don't know, here's what I'm feeling at the time, that becomes your signal that I'm feeling something.
Right.
And then if we can learn how to recognize that signal and then learn to maybe even take a time out to then drop down and try to explore what is it that I'm feeling right now? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you can get to what I'm feeling, then you can find what do I need?
Yeah.
And then you can ask for what you need,
Yeah.
which is what happens in, a quote unquote typical person anyway.
Sure.
But what we've got to do is basically take the back off the machine, look at the wires, figure out how this thing is wired, and understand
Mm-hmm.
how it works. Because a lot of the reason why people who experience flare ups and codependency, a lot of the reason why they struggle is because they just want to deny it and push it away so much.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the beginning of help, whether it's with codependence or addiction or whatever, the first step is admitting my life has become unmanageable and I'm powerless to change it.
Yeah. And I so resonate with it being in the same line of addictive places, because I experience that in my own body of like, there are people who I am very attracted to, and I know it's because it's a codependent attraction. It's like, oh, that person and all their issues, I want to fix them. And I can see that now where I wasn't able to before. And I can, understand what that is and understand why I'm drawn to that. It feels like a visceral, like in my body, like, oh, my body is walking itself over there. It's gonna say hi to that person. And I think I definitely agree on the kind of co-addicted aspect. I don't know if this is what you're referencing, but I read Pia Medley's Facing Love Addiction recently. And it
Yeah.
was like, that woman had my number. And it's like, oh geez, like, okay, these are all the relationships I witnessed growing up. This is what I was kind of told a relationship is supposed to be. And then, yeah, I did that same thing, and it was utterly devastating for me.
Yeah.
And learning, awareness and knowledge about what that is, what it's like for me, my own self, has really helped me be able to make those changes, to see when those flags come up, even within my own. And it happens in lots of relationships, even in my relationship with my partner. I've got a new boss now, and just new relationships. And you're like, oh, okay, let me make sure I'm keeping the codependency on track. And it'll happen over time. And I think that I will struggle with aspects of codependency for the rest of my life, because it's something that I've learned. But like you said, it's also now something that I've unlearned. And I'm very protective of taking care of myself when it comes to needs, especially in that area.
Boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think
Those
also, I would encourage you to maybe even adopt a mindset of this is something that everyone has in them, codependency. So it's not even like you are a special kind of broken. You're not.
Thank you.
Because every single person has codependency flare-ups. It just happens. True. It just happens. And so, I have not read Pia Melody's stuff. I have it on a list of books on Amazon that I want to read.
Yeah, it's good.
But having specialized in sex addiction, sex addiction really is like an umbrella term that can include love addiction, relationship addiction, porn addiction, sex addiction. It's considered under a category called process addictions, where most people think about addiction as substance addiction.
Right.
That's going to be your alcohol, cigarettes, whatever it is you can put in your hand to put in your body. Process addictions are addictive behaviors that will produce the same neurochemical response in a person that a substance addiction will. They manifest themselves out in a different way. And so, codependency can have some of those qualities as well. But I think, you're not a unicorn.
Thank you.
I tell my clients and I tell people on the show all the time, it sounds like you got a bad case of being a person.
Right? It's so easy to forget that for yourself and so easy to remember it for other people. Right? I tell people all the time, I'm like, yeah, it sounds like you're a human. And then it's like, when you feel it in your own self, you're like, well, this is my thing. This is what I've been through. And it's very helpful to hear other people be like,
Mhm.
yeah, just like everybody else. I'm like, right,
Yep.
right. Just like
Yeah.
everybody else.
Life of a therapist. There you
Yep.
go. Well, let me ask you this. I wonder if you can tell me something that you have learned from either the clients that you worked with or the people that you've worked with. What have they taught you?
Yes. They taught me a lot. And, I was trying to think through some specific things that my clients taught me. And there are still things that I remember to this day and moments that are meaningful to me, where they taught me something or had an awareness and things like that. But the overarching themes of what I learned during that time period, because it really, that time period of being a therapist and being in graduate school really rocked my world in several ways. But the biggest thing in being a therapist and meeting with people day after day, one to one, hearing people's stories, the two things I learned, one is that people are really complex, really complex. And, I lived like a lot of people in a space of dualistic black and white thinking that there's
Binary.
good, binary, there's good people and there's bad people. But I've learned in sitting with people and being with humans is that there's always something underneath.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something underneath. And being a therapist really taught me how to have empathy for every single person. Sometimes that's really annoying to have, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times it's really wonderful to have that, having to find empathy and depth in the story behind, both sides of a picture, on the side of the abuser and on the side of a survivor. And that doesn't mean there's no consequences. Like, there's still consequences in life for behavior, but trying to really drill down to the heart of what people are, which is human and imperfect and messy and good messy and difficult messy. That's really, really shaped and changed my outlook on life and just the
Yeah.
worldview that I see people from.
Well, I think what you're saying, everybody makes sense in the context of their story.
Right.
And that's not to say that the choices a person makes are good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
wise or unwise, healthy or unhealthy. It just means,
Yeah.
like I mentioned earlier, there's times where, a client will tell me that they've had a slip or a relapse. And then
Mm-hmm.
as I call it autopsy, as we do the autopsy of what it is that happened, it makes a lot of sense that they chose that.
Yeah, of
Now,
course.
now we're going to learn to make a different choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the things I love the most about recovery is that it gives people choices. Whereas before, they felt like, I don't have a choice. I am a piece of iron. The thing is a magnet and I'm
Yeah,
just heading
this is
towards
it.
it. Yeah, I'm just heading
Yeah.
towards it. And I think that one of the things I love the most about whenever clients, enter into recovery is them saying, I felt the pull. I remembered X. I remembered Y, and I
Mm,
chose something
mm,
different, you know?
yeah.
And
Oh,
it makes
go ahead.
sense in the context of the story, you know?
Yeah, my partner and I say all the time, I think someone said it to him, that it was always going to turn out this way. And not in a like deterministic, like you had no option, but in a place of like, um, these choices that I made, the experiences that I had growing up, like, of course I ended up here,
Yeah.
wherever here is, and being able to have empathy for your own journey and own story. And like, I didn't know any other way to do anything. I didn't know any other way to love people. Of course I ended up here.
Yeah.
And like, that's the beauty of recovery. And I relate to recovery in so many ways of, you can't choose what happened to you when you're younger in your life and these experiences you have, and you're trying to just make sense of the world. But and I really relate to that in the movie too, right? They're like
Mhm.
coming to this place of adulthood and their own choices, and how do they reconcile all of these things they thought they wanted as kids, but now they're really having to face all these choices. As you're getting older, you get that duty and responsibility and difficulty of figuring things out, making your choices for yourself, of do you want to do it the way you've always done it or the way you were taught, or are there other options and choices for you if you want to have other options and choices?
I like what you said about empathy. Brene Brown in Braving the Wilderness tells a story about asking people if they believe that in general, other people are doing their best. And then the transformation that can happen inside of you if you choose to believe that.
Yeah.
I would say to anybody that hasn't read that book, that's a great one. Tell me something that you do to take care of yourself.
So we've talked about it a lot already. But boundaries is priority number one, so that we can do a whole thing on boundaries. But the short version of that is, one, I read the Boundaries book by Cloud and Townsend. That's a great one. I haven't read Codependent No More, but I've heard that one's really good.
Which flavor of boundaries did you read? Because it's
I
bit
read
like
a lot
chicken
of them.
soup. Yeah.
I think I just read the two. I read the first, just original Boundaries, and then Boundaries in Dating. And then I led a women's group on boundaries, like
boundaries for women, boundaries for teens, boundaries for
boundaries for people who love dogs. And, for me, it was a great place to start in understanding what are boundaries, how do I place them, and for me, it helps me figure out in that codependent space of where I end and you begin, of where are we too close together? Maybe where are we too far apart? And how do I can use boundaries as that measuring stick and figuring out what am I okay with? What is okay for me as a person? And boundaries are hard because they're to explain because they're self-defined. But so in a tangible example of a boundary for me is I don't work after work. If I can help it. If I can help it in any capacity, I don't work after work. So in the job that I just got out of, I didn't have a job where people would have to call me at night, but I just straight up let them know from the beginning, I have a work phone. It turns off when I leave this building. You can call me and I'll call you tomorrow. Like, done. Now, some people don't have the luxury of that. They're on call, they're in emergency, places. But for me, it was a dedication to seeing my family work long hours and deciding I was not going to do that myself. And so I'm upfront about it. And I'm like, you can call me after work. It's going to go straight to voicemail.
Well, that's why there's voicemail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I value what you want to tell me. I also, here's the basis of boundaries. I also value myself.
Yes.
And at different times of the day, I may value one of those more than the other.
Correct.
And after 5 p.m., the self is going to take the top spot. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Right. I've given you 8 hours. It's my turn.
You know what's so funny about that is I actually this week, I started thinking a lot about that. I started writing out values by which I wanted to guide the way that I spend my time.
Yeah.
And the first one that I wrote out was, and I don't mean this in like a morbid or like a fear of death kind of way, but the first one I wrote out was my time with my wife is limited.
Sure.
And everything is impermanent. And I want to value that the highest.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I wrote was, because of that, work stops at 5.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's hard.
Work stops at 5. And it really is. And there's times where, like, especially in private practice, if I get a contact from a potential client on Saturday at 11 a.m., it is like an itch underneath my skin to not want, because I've lost potential clients because I waited an hour to respond. And that's because I was in a session. So there's something in me that's like, I gotta,
Oh yeah, it's definitely a back and forth I go to in myself, and sometimes I'm a lot better at it than others, but it's a priority I try to place on myself. And the other thing I was going to share about what do I do for myself is I in the processes that I've been through, I've decided to commit to a lifelong journey of healing. So for me, that may look like I'll likely go to therapy for the rest of my life. I'll be in and out of seasons of therapy because I view it and believe in it as a resource. Just like going to the gym. If you go to the gym one time in your life, that's great for that time you were there, but you're probably not going to be like the most fit bodybuilder type person. And that's,
You know what? So like most things that I talk to people about, I relate back to recovery, but there's a saying in recovery, yesterday's recovery is as good as yesterday's shower.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So you gotta, like what you're saying, it's a tool, it's a practice, it's a discipline. I'm going to keep using it. I'm going to keep using it. Yeah.
And sometimes it's therapy. Sometimes it's books. I read a lot of different books and things like that. Sometimes it's trying to practice mindfulness meditation. Sometimes it's just a commitment to my health in a variety of ways. So like I have a financial person I work with who tries to help me reach my goals financially and be in a place where I feel healthy in my finances. And so it's an overarching, things that fold into each other that all impact each other, but it's the commitment I've made to invest in myself. And that self-care tangibly looks very different at different times, but overall it's a reminder to keep turning back to myself and keep coming back and keep choosing to healing and health.
Well, I think the strange thing about self-care is it can't look the same way all the time because you are not the same person that you were
correct
10 years ago, 10 months
5 minutes ago.
Yeah. So as you continue to grow and change, your self-care has to adapt because your needs are going to change. And self-care is all about how do I help myself become the most me that I can be.
Yeah.
And if the you that you're being is different than the you that you were, then your self-care has got to be different. So you got to continue to adapt. And I like how you speak about it in the terms of a process. I was listening to, this was probably 2 weeks ago, an interview that Tim Ferriss did with a guy named Jocko Willink, who was a former Navy SEAL. And he asked him about like, what kind of philosophies or mantras or sayings have you found that have guided you to where you are in life today? And he said, one that has helped him tremendously was no hurry, no pause. And he said that he got it from someone he knew that was Buddhist, but it's that slow and steady progress. It's that process of I'm on a journey. I'm going to keep walking on my journey.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah. No, so the process part is the other thing I learned from my clients, that, empathy for everyone, but also that everything is a process. So at the time, the short version is at the time, it was very frustrating when clients were really early on and they weren't ready. And I'd be like, but don't you want to work? And now I can look back at that and be like, you're not ready. Great. Let's talk about like where you're at. And that really having an abundance mindset that there's time for the process and that the journey in and of itself is the value. It's not being at A and getting to B. It's the process that we've talked about so much in this session that gets you there. And I learned that from my clients.
And what's crazy is you can look back, and I'm saying this into a mirror too. You can look back and know that your personal work and struggle is what developed the change in you. But you want the client to skip over that.
Oh yeah.
And just get to the everything's great part, which in reality, that's kind of like taking their change from them.
Yes. And I definitely did at the time. Like I hadn't done this journey of personal work to that degree. So at the time I was definitely like, come on, let's go. And now I'm like, let's let everybody take their time.
Yep. They'll get there.
Yeah, they will.
So typically at the end, what I say to people is, if somebody has been listening and they feel like they could really connect with you and they want to see you as a client, how can they get a hold of you? Since you are in a different kind of role.
Yeah.
What would you like to say to folks that are listening?
Yeah. So kind of both sides. If someone is looking for a therapist, I specifically am not a therapist, but at The Becoming, we have 16 therapists currently, more ongoing, and 2 wellness fitness coaches. So we have lots of options for people looking for therapists. You look like you have something to say.
No. I said,
Oh,
ooh, I was like, wellness. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So we have 16 therapists who have a variety of different specializations, a lot in addictions, EMDR, DBT, some people who do yoga, like all just different kinds of specialties. We have locations all in different areas of Tennessee. So Nashville, Madison, Brentwood, Green Hills, some offices in West Nashville, White Bridge Road. And then we also actually have an office in Asheville, North Carolina as well. Mm-hmm. And we're doing telehealth right now, of course. So as a client, you can for sure check us out there. If you are a therapist and you are looking for a place to be and belong and become, you can come hang out with us and see what that process is like, whether you're trying to start your private practice, grow in your private practice, just make connections and referrals. We have a partner in the addiction space right now, and then I'm also responsible for building new partnerships. So there'll be more to come on that end as well. So I'm sure in the show notes, you'll see all of our socials. You can find us there. You can email me directly at diana@thebecomingcounseling.com. And then you can also check out our website, which is thebecomingcounseling.com.
Yeah, which I loved. I mean, I was looking at it before we started our interview, and I thought it was very clear about what you guys do, who you are, which is not always the truth when you're looking at a agency's website. Yeah, so I always appreciate it when it does happen. Oh my gosh, Diana, it has just been so incredible to have you on today. Thank you so much for coming, and I've just so much enjoyed getting to hear your story and getting to talk with you about this. And it's been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation and being able to share my own experience and story. And hopefully if anyone else resonates with that, I'd love to just chat on a personal side too, because we're all humans out there figuring it out together.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.